Tonight, I want to tell you a story so fierce. It still echoes across the desert wind, set deep in the American West, where dust, blood, and silence shape the fate of those who dare to stand their ground. It's a land where survival isn't promised, and every ridge hides a secret waiting to be uncovered. And this story begins with something small, just a single set of unfamiliar hoofprints in the dirt, but enough to set in motion a fight that would decide the fate of an entire valley. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The sun hung low over the Arizona territory like a branding iron pressed against raw hide-bleeding red. Across the jagged ridges of Serpentback, dust rose in thin spirals from the cracked basin floor, and the air tasted of dry juniper and old blood. Rae Harlan moved through it all without hurry boots, finding holds on sandstone where most men would have slipped. At 47, she carried the desert in her bones, steady, unyielding, sharpened by seasons that broke weaker souls. The mountain lion had been watching her for 3 days. She felt it before she saw it, the quiet shift in the wind, the sudden absence of birdsong. Now it crouched on a narrow ledge 20 feet above golden eyes, locked on hers, tail flicking once like a slow metronome. 200 pounds of coiled muscle ribs showing through tawny hide, from drought and hunger. Rae's right hand rested on the Damascus blade at her hip, the same knife Cole had given her years ago, saying it could split bone like water. She climbed without sound fingers, finding pockets in the rock no wider than a coin. The cat knew she was coming. When it lunged, the world narrowed to heat and motion, fur against buckskin claws, raking her left shoulder, the metallic stink of blood, mixing with sage. Rae pivoted, blade flashing in a tight arc. A wet rip of flesh, a guttural roar, cut short. Then silence broken only by her own ragged breathing and the distant cry of a red-tailed hawk. Minutes later, she knelt beside the still form. 3 deep gashes burned along her arm, but the pain was distant, almost polite. She laid a palm on the warm flank. "Go clean," she whispered in the old tongue Lozen had taught her long before Shadow Valley had a name. "Your strength walks with me. Your sight guards my path." She worked carefully, taking only the canines and 1 claw, not trophies, but consecrations. The rest she left for the vultures and the wind. By the time the sun pulled red along the western rim, Rae descended the canyon wall, blood stiffening on her sleeve. Shadow Valley waited below, a dry cradle of land, sealed on 3 sides by cliffs 500 stubborn acres she and Cole had coaxed green against every law of the desert. The house rose into view, stone stacked from the canyon floor timbers, silvered by storm and sun. A thin thread of smoke drifted from the chimney. Home. Sarah stepped onto the porch as Rae reached the yard lantern light, catching the worry in her dark eyes. At 20, she moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had learned early that softness could kill as surely as steel. "Mrs. Harlan," she said, voice catching when she saw the torn buckskin and the dark streaks. "You're hurt." Rae lifted her good hand. "It's nothing worth fretting over." Cat got 1 good swipe before it was done. She eased past the girl into the house, the familiar smell of cedar oil and sage smoke settling around her like an old coat. Inside, Sarah worked with practiced hands, washing the wounds with yarrow tea, pressing poultices of crushed sage and honey. Rae winced only once, then let the sting pass. "Buck still up at the North Spring?" she asked. Sarah nodded. "Pump's acting up again. With the drought, he said he'd be back before dark." She tied the last bandage. "Folks in Vermilion are talking. Say you're half spirit taking lions with nothing but a knife." Rae gave a faint smile. "Folks talk. The land remembers. It only speaks to those who listen." She stepped out onto the back porch as the sky bruised purple. The rocking chair Cole had built for their 10th anniversary still sat there, cedar worn smooth by years of evenings just like this. Rae eased into it, the faint scent of oil rising from the wood. From here she could see everything, the bunkhouse quiet under the first stars, the barn doors closed tight, the Mustang pens still. Beyond them stretched pastures of drought-bred cattle-hardy stock she and Cole had perfected together. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the ache in her shoulder match the deeper one that never quite left. 3 years since Cole's lungs filled with fluid and his breathing turned shallow. Everyone had expected her to sell to leave, to let grief swallow the place whole. Instead, she drilled deeper wells, shifted to tougher breeds, stripped every ounce of waste. Shadow Valley held, thrived even. And that strength had begun to draw eyes she didn't want. A faint scrape of boot on gravel pulled her gaze east. Near the spring, half hidden by mesquite, a single fresh hoofprint cut the dust deeper than any of her crew's mounts would leave the edges still sharp. Not Rafe's sorrel, not Eli's bay. Someone else had been here standing long enough to study the layout. Rae's fingers tightened on the chair arm. She could follow the track now, see where it led. Or she could stay here, let the night close over it, like it closed over everything else. She stayed. The wind rose, carrying the dry scent of pine and distant smoke. Far down the access road, a faint orange flicker appeared, torchlight, moving slow and deliberate. Not Buck. Not anyone she knew. Rae exhaled once slow and measured. The desert had always been patient. Now it seemed someone else had learned to wait. She rose slow and soundless and stepped back inside to fetch the Winchester from its place near the door. The stars came out cold and hard above Shadow Valley, pinning the night sky like scattered nails. Rae Harlan sat in Cole's old rocking chair on the back porch, the wood creaking faintly under her weight. The Winchester rested across her lap barrel, cool against her thigh. She had cleaned the blade first, then the rifle, small rituals that steadied her hands when nothing else did. The shoulder wound throbbed in time with her pulse, a dull reminder that the lion had marked her before she marked it. She kept her eyes on the eastern ridge. The torchlight she had seen at dusk was gone now, swallowed by the dark, but the memory of it lingered like smoke in her throat. She told herself it could have been a drifter, a lost rider, anyone passing through on the old Prescott Trail. The desert was full of men who moved at night and asked no questions. She wanted to believe that. Wanted it badly enough that her fingers stayed loose on the stock instead of tight. A soft footfall came from inside. Sarah appeared in the doorway, carrying a tin cup of coffee so hot the steam curled like breath in the chill air. The girl hesitated, then stepped out and set the cup on the rail beside Rae. "You're still bleeding through the bandage," Sarah said quietly. Rae glanced down. A dark stain had seeped through the linen. "It'll stop." Sarah didn't move. "Buck should be back by now. He said the north pump was spitting sand again. If the drought keeps up, I know." Rae's voice came out sharper than she meant. She softened it. "He'll make it. Always does." Sarah nodded, but her eyes stayed on the bandage. Then she looked past Rae toward the access road where the shadows pooled thickest. "You saw something earlier?" "Didn't you?" Rae lifted the cup, let the heat burn her palms. "Maybe." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the distant yip of a coyote and the slow creak of the chair as Rae rocked once, twice. The coffee tasted bitter, like the dust that never quite left her mouth these days. Hoofbeats came then slow, deliberate, not hurried like a man running from something, but careful like a man looking for it. Rae's hand slid to the Winchester without thought. Sarah froze. A single rider emerged from the dark silhouette, tall against the starlight. He reined in at the edge of the yard horse, snorting white plumes into the cold. The man wore a long duster hat pulled low. He raised both hands, palms out and empty. "Evening," he called. Voice smooth, practiced. Didn't mean to startle. Got turned around on the trail. Mind if I ask directions to Vermilion? Rae didn't stand. "Which trail? The one past the Red Bluff." "Thought it cut through here. It don't." She kept her tone flat. "You're on Harlan land? Shadow Valley? Best turn back the way you came." The man tilted his head, studying the house, the barn, the pens beyond. "Nice spread. Been here long enough." He nodded like he'd expected the answer. "Heard talk in town. Railroads pushing east fast. Southern Pacific laying track like they're running out of time. Folks say companies are buying up every acre they can touch. Good water, good grass, worth a fortune if the line comes through." Rae felt the words settle in her gut, like lead shot. She kept her face still. "That's so just talk." He shifted in the saddle. "You got papers on this place, clear title?" "Some of these old claims. They get messy when the surveyors show up." Her thumb brushed the hammer of the rifle. "Title's clear, paid in full." Cole Harlan saw to that before he passed. The stranger's eyes flicked to the bandage on her shoulder, then back to her face. "Sorry for your loss, ma'am. But times change. Land changes hands. Happens quiet mostly. Till it don't." Rae met his gaze. "You asking or telling asking?" He smiled small thin. "Just curious." She let the silence stretch. The horse shifted, leather creaking. Sarah stood rigid beside the door, breath shallow. Finally, Rae spoke. "Cole used to say holding land ain't about fighting it. It's about learning to breathe with it. You breathe wrong, it chokes you." The man gave a short laugh. "Poetic. I'll remember that." He touched his hat brim. "Obliged for the talk. I'll find my way." He turned the horse slow, letting it walk a few steps before he kicked it into a trot. Dust rose behind him, pale in the starlight. Rae waited until the hoofbeats faded completely. Then she exhaled long and shaky. Sarah stepped closer. He wasn't lost. No. He was looking at the house. The spring. Everything. Rae set the cup down. Her good hand trembled once before she clenched it. Sarah had heard every word. The girl's face was pale, eyes wide with something Rae hadn't seen there before. Real fear, not the kind that came from a lion's claws, but the kind that came from men who carried paper and promises. "I'll talk to Buck when he gets in," Rae said. "We'll keep watch tonight." Sarah nodded, but didn't move. "What if he comes back?" Rae looked out at the dark road. "Then we'll know." She stood slow, the rifle in the crook of her arm. As she turned toward the door, something caught her eye. A small folded paper lying in the dust where the stranger's horse had stood. It must have slipped from his pocket when he turned. Rae bent, picked it up. The paper was heavy, official looking. She unfolded it under the lantern light from the doorway. A mortgage notice. Shadow Valley. Amount due $9,000. Dated 3 weeks ago. Signed with a flourish she didn't recognize. Her fingers closed around the sheet until it creased. The night pressed in closer, colder. Somewhere far off, a coyote called once, sharp, questioning. Rae stared at the paper a long moment, then folded it again and slipped it into her shirt pocket. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The stranger had left more than directions behind. He had left proof that someone already knew exactly how much it would cost to take what was hers. And he had left knowing she had seen it. Rae stepped inside, closed the door softly, and slid the bar home. The Winchester stayed in her hand. Outside, the stars watched indifferent. The morning sun hammered Vermilion County like a blacksmith's mallet, turning the dirt street into a pale ribbon of heat. Dust hung in the air, stirred by every boot and hoof. carrying the smells of horse sweat, fresh manure, and the faint char of yesterday's cook fires. Rae Harlan rode in slow, leading a string of 3 yearlings she hoped to sell at the livery. The Winchester stayed in its scabbard, but her good hand never strayed far from the Colt at her hip. The shoulder wound pulled with every shift in the saddle, a steady burn that matched the one behind her eyes. She tied the horses outside the feed store and stepped onto the boardwalk. Faces turned, some nodding, others looking away quick. The town had always been small enough to remember favors and slights alike. Today the air felt thicker, like everyone knew something she didn't yet. Buck was waiting by the blacksmith's forge, arms crossed, hat pushed back on his graying head. At 60, he still carried himself like a man who'd outlasted more storms than most. He saw her coming and gave a short nod. "Sold the string?" he asked. "Not yet. Harlan's name still carries weight." She paused. "You get the pump fixed halfway. Needs a new valve. Smith says he's out of stock till next freight." Buck's eyes flicked to the street. "Folks are talking Rae." She felt the words land low in her gut. What kind stranger rode through last night, asking questions? About Shadow Valley, about you. Said something about old debts coming due. Harlan debts. He kept his voice low. "They're saying Cole left things unsettled. That the title ain't clean." Ray's jaw tightened. The paper in her pocket, the one the stranger had dropped, felt heavier than lead. She hadn't shown it to Sarah yet, hadn't wanted to see the girl's face when the lie became real. Buck went on. Old man Pritchard at the saloon was buying drinks for anyone who'd listen. Said you're hiding something from the days Cole was sick. Something about money owed to the bank in Prescott. Rae exhaled through her nose. Pritchard's tongue runs on whiskey and spite. Always has, maybe. But people listen when money's mentioned. And they're listening to the name Coltra Land Company now. Say they're buying up every spread between here and the Gila. Quiet-like, till someone won't sell. Rae glanced across the street. Sheriff Cade Holt leaned against a post outside the jail hat, low watching her with the flat eyes of a man who'd already counted the coins in his pocket. She walked over, boots deliberate on the boards. "Morning, Sheriff. Mrs. Harlan." He touched the brim, but didn't lift it. "Heard you had a visitor last night. Word travels. Word always does." Holt straightened. "Anything I should know?" Rae met his gaze. A man came asking directions. "Left this." She pulled the folded mortgage notice from her pocket and held it out. Holt took it, scanned the page, then handed it back without expression. "Looks like bank business. Nothing criminal on its face. No threats, no violence. Can't arrest a man for carrying paper. Even if the paper's a lie, prove it's a lie." He shrugged. "Till then it's just words on a page. And words don't break laws." Rae felt the heat rise in her throat. "You know who's behind it. I know names get thrown around. Coltra's got money. Money buys patience. And patience buys time." Holt's voice dropped. "You stir this up without proof, you'll be the one folks whisper about. Widow Harlan clinging to a dying spread, making trouble for honest business." Rae folded the paper again. Her fingers shook once before she forced them still. Honest business don't ride at night and drop threats in the dust. Holt looked past her shoulder. "Go home, Rae. Keep your head down. Things blow over." She turned away without another word. The street felt narrower now, eyes following her like shadows. Buck was still at the forge when she returned. He'd been haggling with the smith over a length of pipe. "Val said no sale today," Buck muttered. "Said he don't want trouble with Coltra's people. Won't sell me the valve neither. Says it's bad for business." Rae stared at the anvil, the hammer resting idle beside it. The forge fire snapped, sending sparks up into the bright air. Buck had ridden for her and Cole since before the first well was dug, loyal as stone. Now he was paying for it in small, quiet ways, delayed repairs, closed doors, whispers that would grow louder. She looked at him. "You don't have to stay." Buck snorted. "Don't start that. I ain't going nowhere." Rae swallowed. The fear wasn't for herself anymore. It was for Sarah waiting at the house, for Buck standing here with nothing but loyalty and a lame pump for the handful of hands, Rae Feli, who still rode for the brand. If the whispers turned to shouts, if the paper turned into a marshal's notice, they'd all pay. Not with blood, not yet. With isolation, with slow ruin. She could keep it to herself. Let the rumors die down. Hope the Cultra name moved on to easier pickings. Or she could tell Buck everything, the paper, the stranger, the torchlight, and pull him deeper into the shadow that was already falling over Shadow Valley. She opened her mouth and closed it. The word stuck. Buck watched her patient. "Whatever it is, Rae, we'll face it same as always." She nodded once, throat tight. "Let's get what we can and ride." They left town without the valve. The ride back was quiet dust rising behind them in a long pale veil. The sun climbed higher, merciless. When they reached the yard, Sarah was waiting on the porch, face pale. In her hand, she held a folded envelope, plain no address, sealed with a blob of red wax. "It came an hour ago," she said. Ryder dropped it at the gate and left without a word. Rae took it. Her fingers felt numb. She broke the seal. Inside, one line in careful script, "Shadow Valley will change hands, one way or another." V. Crow Rae stared at the words until they blurred. Sarah watched her, waiting for the reassurance that always came. This time it didn't. The wind moved across the yard, stirring dust against the porch rail. Somewhere in the distance, a calf bawled once, lonely, unanswered. Rae folded the letter and slipped it into the same pocket as the mortgage notice. She looked at Sarah, then at Buck. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched heavy as the heat, and in it, Rae felt the first real crack in the life she had tried so hard to hold together. She turned toward the house steps, slow. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. The night settled over Shadow Valley like a shroud of black velvet, heavy and unbroken, save for the faint whisper of wind through the mesquite. Rae Harlan hadn't slept. The letter from Vance Crow lay unfolded on the kitchen table, its words staring up at her like a bad omen carved in stone. She'd read it a dozen times each pass, stirring the old ache in her chest, the one that came from remembering Cole's last days, his voice weak but steady as he signed the final papers on the land. "Breathe with it," he'd said. Now those words felt like a taunt. Sarah had gone to bed uneasy, her face drawn in the lantern light. Buck sat across from Rae, now oiling his old Henry repeater by the stove. The air smelled of gun oil and the faint metallic tang of her still seeping bandage. He hadn't asked questions when she showed him the letter, just nodded like he'd seen this shadow coming long before she had. "Men like that don't warn twice," he said finally, voice low. Rae rubbed her thumb over the Colt's grip. "They don't." The first sign came as a distant rumble, hoofbeats too many for one rider, cutting through the quiet like a knife through hide. Buck stood, rifle in hand. Rae moved to the window, peering out. 3 sets of lanterns bobbed in the dark, carving yellow paths up the access road. No moon tonight, just stars, cold and distant. By the time they reached the yard, Rae was on the porch, Winchester cradled loose, but ready. Buck flanked her shadow, merging with the house wall. Sarah stirred inside. Rae heard the creak of floorboards, but she prayed the girl stayed back. The riders fanned out, 8 men, total horses stamping dust into the still air. The leader dismounted first, a tall man in a tailored coat that shimmered faintly under the lantern glare. His face was sharp eyes like chips of flint. Vance Crow. Behind him, his men carried holsters heavy with iron, and 2 lugged tin canisters that sloshed with the telltale stink of kerosene. Mrs. Harlan Crow called voice smooth as snake oil. "Forgive the hour. Business don't keep to clocks." Rae didn't move. "This ain't business hours. State your piece and ride on." He smiled thin and predatory, pulling a sheaf of papers from his coat. "I'm here on behalf of Cultraland Company. We've acquired the mortgage on Shadow Valley from the Prescott Bank. Balance due $9,000. Immediate payment." The number hit her like a gut punch. She'd paid that debt 3 years back, every cent scraped from cattle sales and Cole's last savings. But the paper in his hand said different, a forgery clean as any banker's lie. Her heart hammered, a mix of rage and the cold drip of fear. This wasn't just land. It was Cole's sweat in the wells, his hands in the stone walls. Losing it meant losing him all over again. "Title's clear," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "You're holding smoke." Crow's men shifted, one tipping a canister to spill oil in a slow arc around the barn's base. The sharp, acrid smell cut the night air, making her eyes water. Another poured near the house foundation. They were serious, ready to burn. Crow stepped closer. "Documentation says otherwise. Economic shifts, management changes. You know how it goes. Pay now, or we reclaim what's owed." Rae's fingers tightened on the Winchester. She could feel Sarah's eyes from the window, Buck's tension beside her. The fear wasn't abstract anymore, it clawed at her throat. Accept the lie, let them walk away with the deed, and maybe the fire stayed in the cans, or fight and drag everyone into the flames. One of Crow's men, a wiry type with a scarred cheek, Tate Boone, by the look, cocked his head. "Boss says talk, but we got matches if she don't listen." Rae stepped forward, rifle leveled, but not raised. "Papers my husband kept are inside. Prove it's paid." Crow nodded smug. "Tate, escort her." She led Boone into the house, heart pounding. Sarah shrank back into the shadows, eyes wide with terror. Buck stayed outside, rifle trained. In the study, Rae knelt at Cole's old desk, working the safe's tumblers with her back to Boone. Her mind raced memories of Cole's voice, the lion's claws, the stranger's paper. This was it. No more hiding. The safe clicked open. No papers? Just the Damascus blade. She moved before doubt could stop her, blade flashing across Boone's wrist as he reached for his gun. He gasped, blood welling dark. Her arm locked around his throat knife, pressing just enough to prick skin. Not a sound, she whispered, voice cold, but shaking inside. He nodded, eyes bulging. Outside, Crow paced. "What's taking Rae?" Stepped out first, Boone, stumbling behind her, blade at his throat. "Misunderstanding," she called. "Your man and I talked." Crow's smile faltered. "Release him. We can settle this reasonable." "Reason left when you brought the oil." His men shifted, hands on holsters. One fired a shot, skyward, crack echoing off the cliff's, bullet whining past the roof edge. Sarah yelped inside, ducking low. Buck cursed, stepping forward, now exposed. Rae's pulse roared. She felt the cost in her bones, safety shattered. Sarah terrified Buck, one wrong move from a grave. Her free hand found the hidden lever on the porch rail. Click. Every lantern in the yard died. Darkness swallowed everything, the men, the horses, the oil-slick ground. A long, haunting Apache whistle cut the air from the ridge, then another from the opposite side. Chaos stirred in the black shouts, stumbling feet. Rae held Boone, tight blade steady. No going back now. The night had teeth, and it was biting. Dawn came slow and merciless to Shadow Valley, a thin gray line bleeding along the eastern cliffs before the sun rose to burn it away. The air still carried the sour stink of kerosene spilled in the night, mixed now with the metallic bite of gunpowder and the coppery tang of blood that hadn't quite soaked into the dirt. Rae Harlan walked the yard in silence, boots crunching over broken glass from a lantern someone had kicked over in the panic. Her shoulder throbbed under fresh bandages, but the real ache sat deeper in the hollow place where certainty used to live. The 3 wagons Vance Crow's men had brought stood crooked in the dust. Axles, snapped wheels shot out. One horse lay dead near the corral fence, throat opened by a stray bullet fired blind in the dark. 2 steers limped in the far pasture flanks, gashed where panicked riders had spurred too hard. Rafe and Eli moved among them now, quiet and grim, checking legs and cuts with hands that shook just enough to notice. Sarah knelt by the spring house, filling a bucket from the main well. Her face was pale eyes, red-rimmed from a night without sleep. She hadn't cried, not yet, but the fear sat plain on her, heavy as wet wool. Buck stood beside her, shotgun across his forearms, watching the ridgeline like it might speak. Rae stopped at the edge of the yard, where the oil had soaked deepest. The ground there was black and slick, already hardening under the sun. She crouched, touched it with 2 fingers. It came away sticky, smelling of ruin. Buck walked over, boots deliberate. "We got lucky last night. No one dead, but luck don't refill wells or fatten steers." Rae straightened. "They'll come back. Already did." He jerked his chin toward the access road. Fresh tracks, boots, and hooves circled the perimeter at first light. Sent scouts while we were still picking up pieces. "Word from town is they're spreading poison. Shadow Valley's cursed, haunted by Apache ghosts, doomed to the railroad anyway. Folks won't sell feed to Rafe and Eli this morning. Said they don't want trouble with Cultra's money." Ray's stomach twisted. Rafe and Eli had families and Vermilion wives, children who depended on the wages she paid. Now those wages bought nothing. The herd would go hungry soon. The small well on the eastern edge, the one they used for the garden patch, had been salted overnight. Not enough to kill it outright, but enough to turn the water brackish for weeks. Every bucket drawn would cost twice the labor, twice the time. She looked at Sarah, who had paused with the bucket halfway to her shoulder. The girl met her eyes steady but scared in a way that cut deeper than any claw. Buck lowered his voice. "Got word from Lozin and Cochise this morning. Zeke brought it at first light. Cultra's men rode up to Red Canyon yesterday. Dug test holes near the old burial ground. Lozin says it's no accident. They're marking what they want to break." Rae felt the words land like stones in still water. Red Canyon wasn't just dirt. It was a memory, Apache memory. And hers too, carried in the scars on her arms and the songs Lozin had taught her when she was younger and angrier. To dig there was to spit on both. Zeke and Taza appeared then, moving quiet from the north ridge. They carried no rifles, only knives, and the long Apache bows they favored for silence. Zeke's face was set, eyes hard. "We stay," he said simply. "Coaches says the line is crossed. We stand with you." Taza nodded once. No more words needed. Rae looked around at Buck's lined face, Sarah's trembling hands, Rafe and Eli, working the wounded cattle, Zeke and Taza, waiting like shadows that had chosen to step into light. This wasn't her fight anymore. It never had been, not really. But it was theirs now too. She walked to the main well, and the one still clean, still deep. Water came cold and clear when she drew the bucket. She let it spill over her fingers, feeling the weight of it. We share this, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Every drop. Every sack of grain we've got left. The livery won't sell to us fine. We'll feed the neighbors who've been pushed the same way. If Cultra wants to starve us out, they'll have to starve the whole valley. Buck exhaled slow. Sarah set the bucket down, eyes shining with something between pride and terror. Rae turned to Zeke. Tell Lozin and Cochise we're ready to talk alliance. Real alliance, not just words. He nodded and vanished back toward the ridge. The yard went quiet again, save for the low moans of the hurt steers and the distant call of a raven circling high. Rae stood there, bucket in hand, feeling the first real weight of what she had just offered. Sharing meant less for Shadow Valley, less water through the drought, less feed through the winter, less chance they'd make it if the next fight came harder. But keeping it all meant watching the others fall first, watching Sarah lose the only home she'd known, Buck lose the work that kept his pride intact, Rafe and Eli lose the wages that fed their kin. She set the bucket down. The water rippled once, but then stilled. From the mouth of the canyon, dust rose in a slow plume. Not scouts this time. A larger group horses men, the glint of rifle barrels catching the new sun. Leading them, a tall figure in black tactical gear that didn't belong in this country. Slade gun face scarred from the night before, a fresh bandage across his missing fingers. They stopped at the choke point, rifles unslung, waiting. Rae felt the shift in the air, thicker, heavier, like the moment before thunder. She looked at her people. No one spoke. The choice had been made. The cost was already being paid. And the canyon mouth had just filled with more men who carried more than rifles. The afternoon sun slanted low across Red Canyon, turning the sandstone walls the color of dried blood. Shadows stretched long and thin from the rim, pooling in the shallow bowl where the old burial ground lay. Rae Harlan walked the last quarter mile alone. Boots soft on the packed earth, the medicine pouch Lozin had given her years ago, hanging heavy against her hip. She had left Buck and Zeke on the ridge above, rifles ready but out of sight. No need to make this look like war. Not yet. The circle of stones waited at the canyon's heart, simple weathered, arranged by hands that had long since returned to dust. Lozin sat cross-legged in the center back, straight as a young pine, her white hair braided with red cord. Cochise stood beside her arms, folded eyes scanning the rim like he could see through rock. Neither rose when Rae approached. They simply waited. Rae eased down across from Lozan knees, creaking from the night's fight, and the old wound that never quite healed right. The air here smelled different, cleaner, sharper, laced with the faint mineral bite of ancient earth and the dry sweetness of sage that grew stubborn in the cracks. Lozin spoke, first voice low and rough, like wind over gravel. They came yesterday. 5 men. Shovels. Stakes. Said they were checking soil for the iron road. Dug where the ancestors sleep. Rae's stomach turned over slow. She pictured it, the scrape of metal on stone, the careless toss of dirt over bones that had lain quiet for generations. Her own scars itched under the buckskin reminders of the lion of nights she had spent learning from these same people, how to move without sound, how to honor what was taken. Cochise shifted. One carried a camera. Glass eye on a stick, took pictures of the markers, of the places we do not mark with words. Rae closed her eyes for a second. The images would travel back to Prescott, to Tucson, to men in offices who saw only lines on maps, proof that the ground held something worth breaking. And with those pictures would come the whispers in town, Harlan's woman consorting with the Apache, hiding behind old graves to keep her land. The kind of talk that turned neighbors into strangers, turned help into suspicion. Lozin reached into the folds of her blanket and drew out a small leather pouch, edges worn soft by years of handling. Quills and beads caught the dying light. She held it out. When the past rises to wound the present, she said, remember, the lion carries scars, but does not live inside them. Rae took the pouch. It was warm from Lozin's hand. Inside, she felt the small weight of herbs, a single claw fragment, perhaps, from the lion she had taken herself. The gesture cut deeper than any blade. It was forgiveness and warning and trust all at once. Cochise spoke then quieter. You learned to hunt with steel because you needed to prove you could stand before the fiercest thing in the canyon and not be swallowed. But the fiercest thing now is not a lion. It is forgetting. Ray's throat tightened. She thought of Cole, his hands on the first stone of the house, his laugh when the well finally rang clear, the way he'd whisper, breathe with it, when the drought pressed hardest. Shadow Valley wasn't just acres. It was the promise they'd made to each other and to the land itself. A covenant. If she let it go silent, if she let the graves be broken and the stories buried under rail ties, that promise died with it. She looked at Lozin. If I speak out, if I stand with you openly, they'll call me traitor. White woman gone native. The town will turn. The few allies we have left will hesitate. Lozin's eyes held hers. And if you stay silent, the graves open wider. The stories end. Cole's name fades from the stone he laid. The words landed like stones in still water. Rae felt the pull in both directions, safety in silence, ruin in truth. She could keep her head down, let the rumors pass, hope the railroad moved on. Or she could send the letter she had already written, sealed and ready in her saddlebag, a request to an old friend from the Boundary Commission days. Now a captain with the U.S. Cavalry at Fort Whipple. A quiet plea for eyes on Red Canyon before the shovels came back. She drew a slow breath. The canyon wind moved through the stones, carrying the faint scent of pinon smoke from somewhere far off. I'll send the letter, she said. The words tasted like dust and iron. But it won't be clean. Nothing will. Cochise nodded once. Lozin placed her hand over Ray's for a moment, dry, strong, steady. From the ridge above, Zeke's low whistle carried down two short notes. Warning. Rae stood. Buck appeared at the rim rifle, slung face grim. He pointed east. Hooves, many. The sound rolled down the canyon like distant thunder, growing louder with each heartbeat. Dust rose in a thick yellow cloud at the mouth of the pass. Men on horseback, rifles glinting, and behind them, the unmistakable shape of pack mules loaded heavy crates that could only hold one thing: powder and fuse. Slade Gun rode at the front, black coat, flapping face half hidden by the brim of his hat. He reined in at the choke point eyes, sweeping the canyon like he already owned it. Rae felt the shift inside her, not triumph, not rage, just a cold, clear certainty. There would be no victory without blood on the ground. Either the graves stayed quiet and broken, or men died trying to keep them whole. She looked back at Lozin and Cochise. Neither moved. The hoofbeats slowed. Stopped. The canyon held its breath. The night fell on Shadow Valley, like a black iron lid trapping the heat of the day and turning it stale. The air hung thick with the scent of dry earth and distant creosote. But underneath lurked something sharper, powder residue from the earlier skirmish at the canyon mouth, where Zeke and Taza had harried Slade Gun scouts with arrows and rocks. Rae Harlan crouched on the ridge above the house rifle, across her knees, watching the dark road. Her arm ached where the lion's claws had marked her, but the pain was nothing compared to the hollow in her chest. No fear left now. Just a quiet resolve, cold as well water, knowing this was the end of running. Buck and Sarah waited below lanterns, dimmed low. Rafe and Eli held the barn flank Zeke and Taza, melting into the cliffs like ghosts. The alliance had come together in fragments, shared water, shared stories, but tonight it would be tested in blood. Hoofbeats came first, a low thunder building from the east. Then lanterns flickered alive, cutting yellow swaths through the gloom. Vance Crow rode at the center coat, flapping like raven wings, slayed gun at his side, with a face twisted by the fresh bandage over his hand. 15 men, total horses, lathered packs heavy with crates that rattled ominously. Dynamite sticks for breaking rock, now for breaking lives. They reined in at the yard's edge, dismounting with the weary precision of men who'd ridden hard. Crow's voice carried clear. "Harlan, we know you're here. Come out quiet, or we make this loud." Rae stayed still, heart steady, but heavy. She remembered Cole's last night, his hand weak in hers, whispering about the land as a covenant. Not owned, but honored. Now these men meant to burn it all. Crow nodded to Gunn. "Set the charges. If we can't have it, no one will." Gunn and 2 others moved to the house, prying open crates. The sharp, oily smell of fuses and black powder drifted up. They wired sticks along the foundation, trailing lines to a central plunger on the porch. One man kicked over a forgotten oil can, kerosene spilled, igniting with a whoosh from a stray spark. Flames licked low along the dry grass, creeping toward the walls. Sarah's cry cut the night. She had been inside gathering Cole's old papers, the deeds, the maps, the letters that proved Shadow Valley's heart. Now she bolted for the door, coughing as smoke curled in. Buck lunged from the shadows, grabbing her arm, pulling her back. A hired gun spun, fired once, crack echoing off the cliffs. Buck grunted, staggering, blood blooming dark on his shoulder. Rae's breath caught. Buck, loyal, steady Buck, who'd stood by her through droughts and drives. Sarah, young and fierce, now choking on smoke, meant for her. The fire reached the porch edge, flames chewing at the wood where Cole had sat on the quiet evenings. The smell of scorching cedar hit Rae like a fist memory burning. She couldn't wait longer. The choice clawed at her. Let the house go, save the people, keep the graves in Red Canyon whole by yielding ground. Or fight risk, Sarah trapped Buck, bleeding out the alliance shattered before it fully formed. No. She accepted it then, fully, the pain settling like ash in her lungs. This was the price. She slipped down the back trail, silent as taut, circling to the house roof. Climbed the ladder Zeke had left, easing onto the beams above the porch. Below, Gunn wired the last charge, Crow pacing, shouting, "Burn it clean." No Harlan left to remember. Rae dropped like a shadow, boots hitting the porch boards hard. Gunn turned too slow. Her Damascus blade flashed, severing the main fuse line in one slice. Gunn lunged for his pistol. She kicked his knee, sending him sprawling. A shot rang out wild from one of Crow's men, grazing her arm, hot pain ripping through flesh. She staggered but held. Crow drew his own iron. "You're done, woman." Zeke's whistle pierced the air. Apache call, long and haunting. Arrows hissed from the dark pinning sleeves, shattering lanterns. Taza moved like wind knife, flashing to disarm a gunman. Rafe and Eli fired from the barn, careful shots to wound, not kill. Chaos erupted, horses rearing, men scrambling. Rae closed on Crow, blade to his throat. "Drop it." He did, eyes wide with hate. Gunn groaned on the boards, clutching his leg. The flames on the porch licked higher, charring the railing where Cole had carved their initials. Smoke stung Rae's eyes, blurring the world. Sarah burst out, Buck leaning on her, blood staining his shirt. From the distance, hooves many organized. U.S. cavalry bugle faint, but clear. The letter had worked. Her old commission friend had come through. Troopers flooded the yard, rifles leveled. Hands up, federal warrant, Crow spat as irons clicked on his wrists. Tate Boone, bound in the tax shed from the first night, was dragged out. He broke under the captain's glare, spilled everything, forged grants, bribes to the Prescott Bank Cultra's web of lies. Rae watched, arm bleeding, steady the fire chewing at the porch until Sarah beat it out with a blanket. Buck slumped against the wall, breath ragged. In the shadows beyond the lanterns, a lone rider watched Rex Crow, face pale in the flicker. He wheeled his horse and vanished into the night. Rae lowered her blade, the weight of it, sudden and real. The house stood scarred. Buck lived hurt. The graves held for now. But the smoke lingered acrid in her throat, and in the quiet, after the irons clicked, she felt the deeper burn. Nothing clean, nothing whole. The captain approached, but Rae turned away, eyes on the ridge, where the first hint of dawn grayed the sky. Something moved up there, a shadow or a man. Waiting, the night wrapped Shadow Valley in a suffocating blanket, the air thick with the sharp bite of gunpowder and the oily reek of dynamite crates cracked open. Rae Harlan lay prone on the roof beam, body pressed flat against the rough timbers, the Damascus blade heavy in her grip. Her arm throbbed from the graze earlier that day, blood seeping through the bandage. But she pushed it down deep where the old pains lived, with Cole's voice fading in the sick room, with the lion's claws that had taught her endurance. No room for fear now, just the cold, steady weight. Below, Vance Crow's voice cut the dark like a rusty blade. "Harlan, we know you're holed up. Come out or we'll smoke you like rabbits." Slade gun moved with grim efficiency, directing the men. They ringed the house, wiring sticks of mining dynamite along the foundation, red paper casings glinting in the lantern light, fuses trailing like snakes. The smell hit Rae, hard sulfur and cordite, the promise of ruin. Gunn knelt on the porch, hammering a stake for the plunger, his scarred face twisted in concentration. Crow paced the yard coat, swirling. "If we can't claim it, no one will burn it to the ground. Salt the earth so nothing grows here again." One man tipped a kerosene can, too far oil sloshed, pooling near the porch steps. A lantern tipped flame, catching with a soft whoosh. Fire licked upward greedy tongues, chewing at the dry wood. Smoke billowed acrid and choking, curling into the house through cracked windows. Sarah's cough echoed from inside. She had been gathering Cole's papers, the old deeds, the maps he'd drawn by lamplight, proof of the land's heart. Now she stumbled toward the door, arms full, eyes watering. Buck helped. Buck lunged from the shadows near the barn, shotgun in hand. "Get back, girl!" A hired gun, spun pistol barking crack. Buck jerked, blood blooming dark on his shoulder. He staggered but fired back, shot going wide into the night. Sarah screamed, dropping the papers, scrambling to pull him inside as flames climbed the porch rail. Ray's heart seized. Buck, steady Buck, who'd bled for this land, before now slumped against the wall face, pale with shock. Sarah, young and fierce, risking her life for scraps of paper that meant everything. The fire reached the spot where Cole had sat on quiet evenings, charring the wood black. The smell of burning cedar twisted in Ray's gut, a piece of her husband turning to ash. She couldn't watch it burn. The choice clawed at her: let the house go, save the people, yield enough ground to keep the graves in Red Canyon whole. Or fight risk, Sarah trapped in the blaze, Buck bleeding out. The fragile alliance shattered. No. She accepted it fully, then the pain blooming like the fire below. This was the covenant. The land demanded it. Rae dropped from the beam, boots thudding on the porch. Gun whirled too late. Her blade slashed the main fuse line wires, parting with a snap. Gun lunged, grabbing for her arm. She twisted, knee driving into his gut. A shot rang out wild from Crow, grazing her bicep, hot pain ripping fresh. She gasped, blood warm, and slicked down her sleeve. Crow leveled his revolver. "You're finished." Zeke's whistle pierced the night-long, haunting Apache call. Arrows hissed from the cliffs, one pinning gun's sleeve to the porch, another shattering a lantern. Taza moved like shadow knife flashing to disarm a gunman elbow cracking bone. Rafe and Eli fired from the flanks, careful shots to knees and shoulders, wounding, not killing. Chaos erupted, shouts, horses bolting, men scrambling blind. Rae closed on Crow blade to his throat before he could fire again. "Drop it," he did, eyes blazing hate. Gun groaned on the boards, clutching his side. The flames climbed higher, scorching the railing where Cole had carved their initials. Smoke stung Ray's eyes, blurring Sarah's face as she dragged Buck inside his blood, staining the threshold. From the distance, hooves organized thunder. A bugle cut the air, faint but clear. U.S. cavalry standards flapping in the lantern glare as they flooded the yard. Rifles leveled. Hands up, federal warrant for land fraud. The captain, her old commission friend, dismounted, irons ready. Crows spat as chains clicked. Tate Boone, dragged from hiding in the tax shed, broke under the glare. "It's all fake, the grants, the bribes to the bank. Cultra's orders, all of it." Rae watched, arm bleeding, steady the fire, chewing at the porch, until Eli beat it back with a blanket. Buck slumped inside, breath-ragged Sarah, pressing cloth to his wound. In the shadows beyond the chaos, a lone figure on horseback watched Rex Crow, face pale in the flicker. He reined back, melting into the dark. Rae lowered her blade, the weight of it, sudden and real. The house stood scarred. Buck lived hurt. The grave's held for now. But the smoke lingered acrid in her throat, and in the quiet, after the irons clicked, she felt the deeper burn, nothing clean, nothing whole. The captain approached, but Rae turned away, eyes on the ridge, where the first hint of dawn grayed the sky. Something moved up there, a shadow or a man, waiting. Winter came to Shadow Valley, quiet and unforgiving, frosting the ridges in pale silver, while the valley floor stayed mostly bare, stubborn as ever. The sun rose late now, a thin disk of pale gold that barely warmed the air. Rae Harlan stood on the high eastern ridge, breath fogging in front of her face, the wind carrying the dry scent of juniper, and the faint, lingering trace of old smoke that no amount of rain could fully wash away. Below, the house looked smaller, somehow scarred, but standing. The porch rail still bore black char along one side, where the fire had licked highest. They had patched the boards, but never replaced them entirely. The blackened spot remained a quiet reminder of the night. Everything almost ended. Rae traced the scar on her arm through the wool of her coat. The graze from Crow's bullet had healed, crooked, a thin white line that pulled when she reached too far. It matched the deeper marks inside the hollow where Cole's absence lived the weight of choices that had cost more than blood. The valley had changed in small, permanent ways. A cluster of low hogans had risen near the eastern spring, simple earth and timber shelters for the young Apache apprentices, who came now learning water management, plant medicine, the old ways of reading land that drought and greed had tried to erase. The main well was shared openly. Neighbors from the laggard spreads rode in with empty barrels, faces wary but grateful. Rafe and Eli worked alongside Zeke and Taza, repairing fence lines, their laughter sometimes carrying up the ridge, rare but real. Sarah stood a few paces away, the medicine pouch from Lawson hanging at her belt. She had grown taller in the months since the fight, or maybe it was just the way she carried herself now, shoulders squared, eyes steady. Buck leaned on a post nearby, shoulders still stiff but healing, the scar beneath his shirt matching Ray's own. He watched the valley with the same quiet pride he'd always had. Lawson and Cochise had come that morning, riding slow up the trail. They dismounted near the circle of stones Rae had set as a marker, and the old woman walked to Rae without hurry. "The graves are quiet now," Lozin said, voice carrying over the wind. "The papers from Prescott hold. The cavalry marked the boundaries, for a time." Rae nodded. "For a time." Kochi stepped closer, his gaze sweeping the valley. "Land is not owned. It is kept, watched, passed like breath from one guardian to the next." The words settled in Rae's chest, heavy and true. She looked down at the house, at the charred porch where Cole had once sat, rocking slow, talking about futures that never came. The fire had taken a piece of that memory, left smoke in the wood ash in the cracks. She could never sit there the same way again. Sarah moved to her side, silent. Zeke and Taza waited below with Rafe and Eli, all of them looking up now, waiting for whatever came next. Rae felt the pull in both directions. One last time, sell it all, walk away from the scars and the whispers, let the pain fade with distance. Or stay, carry the weight, teach the young ones, keep the covenant alive, even if it meant more nights, like the one that had nearly ended them. She exhaled breath, clouding white. The choice had already been made, carved into her the same way the scars were. She would stay. Not because she was unbreakable, but because breaking would mean letting the land forget. Lozin placed a hand on her arm, dry, strong. "You are not alone in the scars." Rae met her eyes. "I know." They stood in silence as the wind moved across the valley, stirring dust along the old access road. Far off from the high rim where the lion used to hunt, a single cry rose low, mournful, echoing down the canyon. Not close enough to threaten, but close enough to remind. Rae whispered the old words into the wind, and the ones she had spoken over the lion's body months ago. "Your strength walks with me. Your sight guards my path." The cry answered once more. Faint, then gone. She turned back to the valley. Sarah watched her, waiting. Buck straightened, despite the ache in his shoulder. Zeke and Taza stood ready. The apprentices moved between the hogans, carrying water, learning. Rae started down the ridge steps, slow but sure. The others followed without a word. Behind them, the wind kept moving, carrying the faint smell of old smoke and new sage. Shadow Valley endured, not whole, not untouched, but alive. And the scars it bore now belonged to more than one pair of hands. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.